Do you find that attractive, that idea of like getting rid of your phone on this? Because I think this is always the thing that it feels so many of us are balancing right now, right? Where it precisely like what you were saying is we have to look at on the other side of this amazing time to be alive. Like we're obviously in the midst of, and it's unclear how we're going to get through this, a mental health crisis, right? We're in the midst of a like isolation crisis and the dramatically negative impacts that has on, in this that all of us now. If you think, I was still shocked all the time of, we moved during COVID, we moved from New York City to Columbus, Ohio. But, it still felt very dystopian to me for very many years of sitting on the subway in New York and you look around and everybody is sitting there staring at their phones,
Yeah.
And
bowing. It's actually it's a prayer state of body.
It's such a fascinating mix that we have. Like it's a really precisely what you were saying when you were saying that kind of like an overwhelming amount of information, right? We have so much more information now. And it's very interesting because I think critical to creativity is actually constriction of information, right?
All right, welcome to The Boost, conversations with people promoting mental health. And I'm here with Brad Arner, who is the founder of Healer's Kit. He is a tech entrepreneur, has lived a number of different lives, as he's called it, and programs and businesses and initiatives that he's been a part of. Not all successful. He's been through some failures, and that, of course, as we know, is some of the best opportunity for learning. But Brad and I had an opportunity to connect recently, and I really enjoyed the conversation, wanted to bring it to this audience here. So Brad, I'm stoked to be talking with you today. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks, Steve. You put it so eloquently, my varied background. But I'm doing phenomenal. It's always like the adjustment of, how this is, like entrepreneurial lifestyle, right? You sort of go into the weekend, which is very lightly a weekend, and start getting, starting the second day of the week, usually for me at least, which is Monday, and then getting into, the flow of like, oh, okay, what are we doing this week? What's on the schedule? And so yeah, it's the usual. It's good moments. You got a good cup of coffee, and going into the week. So it's good. It's great.
Nice.
How about you? How you doing?
Well, my short-term memory is amazing. So it was nice to get your intro just before this call and then regurgitate it. I think I did a nice job.
That was great. It was amazing.
He's like, how does he know this stuff? I'm doing well. Yeah, the entrepreneurial cadence is something I've been playing around with actually lately. Part of it was inspiration from a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. I don't know. Have you read that book?
I have.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts about that and how you sort of thinking about implementing that?
Well, the one thing that's really stuck is the idea of thinking about ourselves as athletes or musicians or other kinds of performers, because I do love to work, but I did go into sort of a traditional 9 to 5 Monday through Friday club thing. And I don't know that it fit my energy or my flow. And I felt ashamed of that actually for a while. I felt insufficient because I just wasn't able to kind of fit into that mold. And the entrepreneurial life is fascinating because you are out in the wild, you create your own schedule. I definitely can relate to that. Sunday is the first day of the week, Monday is the second day. But in the book, it talks about how athletes never do game day 3, 4, 5 days in a row. It's like you have a game day, then you have a practice day or a prep day, maybe a rest day. And on rest day, you're totally resting. You're not doing any work. So Monday now I jump into cash flow analysis, and I do my prep day is Monday. And then Tuesday is game day for me. And then I'm trying to take Wednesday off entirely.
Nice.
But then that means my Saturday morning is some work and my Sunday evening is some work too.
Mm. So that's one interesting thing that I have seen over the years. Living an Orthodox Jewish lifestyle, right? We essentially have a hard stop every single week on Friday afternoon, Friday night from sundown until Saturday night sundown, which basically amounts to like 25 hours, where we turn everything off. I mean, not turn everything off like, it's not as we still utilize electricity, but meaning we basically disconnect like from everything. And so, it's always curious to me now. There are a lot of people that are talking about this idea of like a digital Sabbath, right? And it's pleasant, I guess. It's nice to see a lot of people finding a lot of value in that same thing that we just sort of experience inherently in our schedule every single week. And it wasn't until really one of the companies that we were building out and that grew quite big, and it was really the usual like high growth. I mean, we were just like, we bringing on like 40 people every 2 weeks, just insane pace of growth and insane both internally and externally. And I had so many people on the team, they would come to me and they would say, "Oh my gosh, like I envy you so much that you have like this, and so of course I would just tell people like, just do it yourself, and you realize like it's hard. It's sort of a built-in advantage because when you have it built in, we're like, listen, this is it, and you're able to utilize the structure of, just our community and lifestyle and stuff like that, right? That it's like, okay, this is just the way it is. It takes a lot more effort for a lot of, people that don't grow up in the same community to sort of put that in place. But it has, over the years, especially in entrepreneurship, I have grown so appreciative of that, or I've been able to sit with it a lot better now. And sometimes in some ways, I think I sit with it a lot better, even from seeing other people realizing, like people that are not trying to be Orthodox Jews, adopting some of the like digital Sabbath and stuff. And you realize like, oh, wow, there is a lot of value here. There is like, and, and sort of going from the place of viewing it as, oh, okay, well, I have to wait to respond to this email another 25 hours to now it's like, I can't survive without, that 25 hours like shutdown and just like, like once it's off. And it's like, listen, I'll pick it up and whatever it gets to on the other side, that's, I'll figure it out then. But, but it's like, okay, we've got the 25 hours off. That's it. That's it.
Well, that's fascinating. And I chuckle about that too. Yeah, it's like if it was good enough, if God did it, like God was like 6 days of work and then rest on the seventh, like certainly maybe there's, whether you're religious or not, or believe in God or not, there's probably some value or meaning in an old story like that stood the test of time, and other applications too, like fasting. Like I didn't grow up in a tradition of fasting, but now, fasting is like wildly popular. Like we're like, but it had to be our idea. Like, oh, what we should do is intermittent fasting. It's like, yeah, who did that? Like everybody thousands of years ago. True. Or, and I love that you have a higher power, so it's like, well, hey, we're unplugging because we have a reason for this and a higher power for this. But we see it in like, in applications like this book I was talking about, where it's like, oh, what you should do is you should take a day off a week where you don't do anything. And So it is funny, I think, or meditation and prayer, like the
Yes.
similarities between meditation and prayer are so common, or even gratitude, like from a mental health perspective, like,
Yeah.
uh, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like, there's a big thing in there about, a higher power. And when you're talking about gratitude, it's like, well, it's not who you have to be grateful to something else outside of yourself. You can't just be grateful to yourself. I guess you could, but it's very echo chamber. You have to let
Yeah.
that flow out of you somewhere else. And so, yeah, all sorts of applications that come from the old archetypal stories and or the spiritual traditions.
Yeah. I would say there's, I think there's there's a lot of people, how to phrase this in a way that I want to make sure I'm saying it well, that it's very interesting to see the even what you're saying, this intermittent fasting, and there is so much more similarity behind these, I don't know what, like high performance, not high performance, but like wellness, well-being, growth. Here I'm thinking, I don't want to, I'm not a huge, I'm not super knowledgeable about everything that he puts out, but like Andrew Huberman and sort of, a lot of these individuals that have, Peter, is it Peter Attia, the doctor who, they've put out so much of this material on like preventive health and all these things that we can implement in our day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's surprising to me how much of it overlaps with these things that 500 years ago they would have been like, oh, these weird aesthetics are doing it, in the off in a monastery somewhere, and it's coming so much more into everybody's day-to-day life, which I think is it's good. It's even very good for those of us that may have that inherently as part of our lifestyle, but we don't necessarily give it. Sometimes it's very beneficial to see somebody else call out the value of that, because sometimes we just go about a routine and we don't even take the time within our own day-to-day to spot all these small things that we do. We may
Mm-hmm.
already inherently be doing them throughout our day.
Yeah.
Like I would imagine there's probably countless different situations throughout your day that you're actually already doing all of these, optimizations, right? Of like just that many people have already figured out. And then somebody calls it out in a book or calls it out in a podcast, right? And then you're like, oh, well, that is right. Okay. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it. Maybe it's also like, I'm also got so many like small little life hacks that I've come up with too. Like
Mm-hmm.
we can all do this,
Yeah.
there's a lot of opportunity here
A lot of
to
opportunity.
optimize life, if you will. I don't know, optimize life or live fully. I think that's what it is. Live fully. That's really
Live fully.
at least that's
I like
how I
that.
view it.
I like that. Live fully. I'm sure somebody has livefully.com, but yeah,
Yes.
I think we are my sort of thesis is that we are spiraling upward in a positive sense, slowly. If you look way back, and back to the stone breakers and the cavemen, and then cycling up toward the industrial age, and now the information age and AI, which we'll talk about, and spiraling up toward the spiritual in terms of a greater awareness. And maybe it's a full circle or some kind of arc. Like without getting too specific, I do feel like there's an opportunity for us to stop doing certain things. For example, we were talking the other day about typing, and I went and fact checked myself, but it's still really shocking to me that the U.S. adult spends 21 or 23 days or 21 or 23 hours a week typing. So basically one day out of our week from midnight to midnight, not even an 8 hour day. It's a full day
Yeah.
we spend typing words out. And what AI can do from a typing perspective, you can get an essay out of AI in a moment. Now, that doesn't mean you should necessarily just submit it, as your thesis, but that we are, I hope, being freed up to be less human resources, in a way. And you know a lot about that, so I would love to get into sort of some conversation around AI if you're open to that, because you're actually using those tools in your business.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, you'd mentioned right before we, in the green room, if you will, the, gratitude, moment of gratitude. And it's like, listen, I think we're living at this amazing time, like I really feel as though there's a certain, I definitely have a romantic streak in me, that's like, oh, the days of old were so much, it would have been so amazing to live in the midst of the
Oh,
burgeoning,
really?
industrial revolution, whatever it might be. Of course, we always ignore the,
Typhoid fever.
like,
All the typhoid
we
fever.
also ignore all the uncomfortable parts.
Yeah, but go on with this track. I'm interested in this.
But I think it's, it's really like I try to reinforce that every single day. It's amazing when you think about like the time period that we're living in right now, right? Like I was having this conversation. We were walking back from the synagogue yesterday with my son. I can't remember exactly how it came up, but we're then talking about longevity, right? I remember how it came up because there's numerous references throughout our tradition of living a long life, and like what aids in living a long life, right? And having a respectful community and respectful relationships between people, right? That was one of the really key topics, and that aids in long life. It's very clearly called out. And so anyway, it led into this conversation on longevity. And I think it is fascinating when you think about, my son asked some question of, do I know how long I'll live? Right. And we have this a tradition in the Jewish community that we say, you should live to 120. Right. And I was saying to my son, it's a great question, because there's like so much advancing right now. Like, I don't know, like, what will it look like? I don't know whether I'm all the way on the super optimistic side that all of a sudden all of us are going to be living 1,000 years, long in the next 50 years. I don't know. I don't know, but I do know that we're sitting in this era when there is so much being uncovered. There's so much potential being built up in so many of these tools, artificial intelligence, all the ways that we have to augment ourselves, that both from the aspect of communicating all these different aspects of longevity research so that they can be broadly spread out to the masses, right? That's probably where I'm spending more of my time right now. As well as all the way up to like research, aiding researchers and doing really complex protein analysis with artificial intelligence. It's insane, like all this stuff going on. I think there's also the side that there's some scary change that it will probably happen, that I don't think any of us know quite what that looks like yet. But it just feels like I really enjoy. There's a guy on YouTube that reviews the latest research papers in artificial intelligence, and he releases on every single day, every couple of days. And, he always ends by saying, like, what a time to be alive, It is like, it's crazy. It's really, it is really crazy to see when you think about the difference. Like, think about what our grandparents grew up with. Like, I remember my grandmother telling me about the moment she remembers like having a phone installed in their house. That was a big deal. The thing about now, I just ordered the other day one of those like little rabbit I don't know if have you heard about these things, the rabbit.
Yeah, I saw it at what was it, CES
Yeah,
yeah, rolled out of that big electronic expo. I watched a video on the founder talk it through.
it's like, I mean, think about the change there. You know, my grandmother was like just getting a telephone line put in, right? And now we have these little things that, will soon be in our pockets outside of these, crazy Apple Vision goggles and Meta, all this other stuff going on. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like what a time to be alive.
What a time to be alive. That'll be my moment of gratitude too, which is, yeah, what an amazing time in life. And sorry, my phone's ringing. My, my mind goes to a number of things, and I don't know all the validity of it, but people talk a lot about the blue zones and that, like, who's living longer in the world and why. And it comes down to, yeah, tight knit community, and if we think about suicide or loneliness and the impact of stress on our lives, going through the entire existence as a rugged individual and an atlas, with the world on our shoulders. Like, there's a reason we told those stories. And then it's like, yeah, kind of, be mindful, eat your vegetables, don't just eat bacon, probably. Although, there's a counterpoint to keto and ketosis and putting your body in different things. Like, we're learning so much that it's almost not even like a pendulum swinging back and forth. It's like this vibration of information that we're learning that's getting us down this path as we find the guardrails. But it wasn't so long ago that it was a very different time. Like, I was reading about Michelangelo and he, how he got better and better and better. I think this is in that same book, the 10X book. And it was talking about how much better he got when he did David, and it's kind of about the reduction of things. So it's not that we need more in our life. We probably need less. But he did another previous statue that we don't know much about, probably. Hercules. He did Hercules in 1492, which should ring a bell. And I was like, oh, Michelangelo was working in 1492, like, when Columbus was sailing. Like, for some reason in my mind, Michelangelo was like millennia ago. And and it was just okay. It was like a good sculpture, but it got lost along the way. But yeah, it's like, oh, it's not that long ago that what we think is very old. So then to fast forward to this rabbit thing, which, if you're not familiar, is kind of a device that can interpret and read all of the various user experiences and buttons in all your apps. And it kind of puts everything into this rabbit, or the rabbit can, via APIs, kind of look and interact with these apps. And if we look at our phone, it's like, yeah, it's covered with apps. Well, this is kind of a solution to say, let the rabbit do that work. And you just say, I want to order a pizza and I'm good with the most popular kind, or I want extra pepperoni. And then the rabbit will do the work for you. Pizza is the most interesting application to me that he said in the demo. I was like, oh, you can make my pizza order faster? I want one.
Go for it.
I'm a pizza connoisseur, though.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah. What do you see in that? Do you find that attractive, that idea of like getting rid of your phone on this? Because I think this is always the thing that it feels so many of us are balancing right now, right? Where it precisely like what you were saying is we have to look at, on the other side of this amazing time to be alive, like we're obviously in the midst of, and it's unclear how we're going to get through this, a mental health crisis, right? We're in the midst of a like isolation crisis and the dramatically negative impacts that has on, in this that all of us now. If you think, I was still shocked all the time of, we moved during COVID, we moved from New York City to Columbus, Ohio. But, it still felt very dystopian to me for very many years of sitting on the subway in New York, and you look around and everybody is sitting there staring at their phones,
Yeah.
and
Bowing. It's
bowing.
actually
It's like,
it's a prayer state of body.
yes, it's like, it's such a fascinating um, mix that we have. Like, it's a really precisely what you were saying when you were say that kind of like an overwhelming amount of information, right? We have so much more information now. And it's very interesting because I think critical to creativity is actually constriction of
Mm-hmm.
information, right? It's not, it's not like you can't do, as humans, we can't handle all the world's information. Like, we have to limit it. We have to, like, constrain it into some fashion so that it actually become concrete and valuable, it feels like. And all of us are balancing that at every given moment. And I think it's only going to get more stark, or I think the challenges are only going to, unfortunately, like, I think it's going to become more and more present as we enter this age of AI, because I think things will both speed up, and then that speed up is going to imply a lot even more of what we've seen. And so it's like, when we're thinking about all these apps on our phones and such, right? Is that, where are you sort of sitting with that? Is that one of the appealing things of something like Rabbit? Like, where do you want to see the world go with sort of all these streams of potential?
I'll tell you where my mind goes. Thanks for asking. I would love to know the same thing about you. The marginal optimist in me, like the 51% optimist, says, one, I look at Rabbit and I think that is like the most rudimentary iPod first edition of what we're going to get out of Rabbit ideas once the Rabbit 12 comes along or somebody else iterates on it. But I love the idea because what I think could happen is that it's sort of like, just to use an analogy, it's sort of like we're all trying to be car mechanics and we're not very good at it. And we're under the hood with the AI and we're trying to like wrestle it around. And it's like, no, let a few experts make sure that the Ferrari is being designed in a way so that when you romp on the pedal, you can go 200 miles an hour. And then, yeah, there's some safety constrictions that come with that. But I think the point there is that we're building a beautiful machine and it's building itself somewhat. And yes, we're going to have to be very careful about that because, like any hyper leveraged technology, it's dangerous. A chainsaw, probably shouldn't be what you eat your dinner with. It's like, it's too much. But what I think is going to happen is that all of this new technology is going to unearth this swing, this pendulum swing, this counterbalance, this cantilevered experience back to the outdoors and back to the old way. Like, I think the romanticist in you might be very happy if you live 120 years because we're not going to have to do much typing and we're not even going to be like this. Like, I think it's very possible that you and I are going to be both holograms in a conversation that is very the antidote to loneliness. It's going to be like, oh, actually, we don't have to stare at our phones. We're going to have to break ourselves of that habit. I had dinner on Friday with a high schooler and his family, and he just said, I'm addicted. I'm addicted to my phone. And then not a joke at all, but it was a little bit like, hey, buddy, do you see what you're doing? 5 minutes later, he had his head in his phone at the dinner table. And I'm like, yes, you are addicted. And we got to get out of that. But I don't think we were even sophisticated to know the game that was coming. So there's going to be some price to pay, some interest that we're going to pay on that. But I think there's the opportunity to put the tech under the hood. And then the problem is going to be, wow, life is simple. What do we do with this simple life? That's one theory. What do you think? Like, where's your head
I mean,
go?
I'm with you. That's where I would like things to go, right?
Yeah.
Is precisely there. I think I keep coming back to the same question, is what do we not want automated, right? Like, what element of our life do I not see AI having any positive impact on whatsoever, right? For me, just personally, I'm sure different people will answer this in different ways. But I keep coming back to, very simply said, like, when I'm having a connective communication, like conversation with my wife, with my kids, I don't see how ChatGPT can help me at all. I think, and if it can, then I would question whether it's a little bit too transactional and it's not really a relationship, right? And it's not really like connective. And so I would very much, where I would like to see things go is in a place where we actually better understand what are those automatable tasks that we spend so much of our time doing, like the typing, right? And what are those what are the deep connective aspects, creative aspects that only we can do as people? And I think that a lot of that has to do with each other, right? We have this principle in the Jewish tradition that that really the ultimate in where humanity needs to get to is where we are so occupied with helping fill in the gaps in other people's lives that like we're not even like, everybody's helping fill in everybody's gaps in their life, right? And that creates inherently like a very, very high level of connectedness, because we're far more concerned about what is going on, how we can help other people than ourselves, right? And there's a balance there, I should say, just to clear. There's always a balance, right? Because there's a healthy give and take behind everything. If you're just giving, it's still off kilter, right? And so there's a balance that needs to exist there, but that's where we want to get to, of like, how do we connect to people? How do I, if you think about it, it's like, how do I take care of all of the administrative elements so that my wife and I can just have the conversation, right? And now I think the reality is that will also be different for different people, like what that is, right? So for example, for me and my wife, that might mean, oh, hey, if we can have dinner automatically made for us, right? That's amazing. I know other people. My wife has many relatives in France who, if you told them that, no, you have to let this thing cook for you, right? They'd be like, I don't want that.
The worst.
Like, that's not what I'm not interested in that. Like, I actually enjoy the cooking process,
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's the interesting thing is like, there's a challenge there in that I think will be a little bit turbulent in the future, is like, the challenge there is really, I'm speaking in this hypothetical scenario where all of us understand our own unique, like we all understand who we are perfectly, right? And we understand what is really like connective and creative about us, and that we're able to really clearly distinguish between like all these different things and say, oh no, I should automate that and I should not automate that, right? That's really, I think, where the challenge becomes, because that's actually really hard. Like, that's real hard for me. I'm talking about in this like very theoretical situation, but let's be honest. If you told me right now, gave me the power to automate every single thing I possibly could, I can guarantee you I would automate a bunch of stuff that, would probably greatly detract from my life, and like that would not make it pleasant. And, whereas I think it really is like, how do we exist? Like, I think that's the thing. Like you have said this, numerous times, outdoors, right? There's a lot of research and a lot of people's just direct experience of the benefits of being outside, right? The sort of, there's a lot of powerful aspects of being deeply connected with nature and all these things around us, right? But I would also say you find sometimes what you find is people, they go outside and they're so connected to their phone and they're so connected to these other things, they don't actually even yet know how to just be outside and just breathe in the air and just like sit in the majesty of a gigantic mountain in front of you, Yeah. And so, myself as well, like, I'm 100% there with everybody else. I stand in front of this majestic mountain and there's certainly a part of me that is like, hey, pull out your phone and take a picture, rather than just sitting there. But I think it's like, how do we find that line? Like, what are those things that we don't want to automate? What are those things for us that we don't want to automate, right? That we would never, ever, ever, ever automate away. And I think there is like actually a really defining aspect of who we are. I mean, as a race, but also individually who we are. Right. And so, like, for example, for me, what I'm working on right now to sort of like dip the toe in that just a tiny bit is when I think about mental health professionals right now, right? What do they really want to spend their time focused on? Is healing. Like, that's what they got into it for, is how can they help people? Right. And what many of them encounter is a situation where they're trying to figure out the business side of all this stuff. And can be overwhelming. And it can have a negative impact on really where they want to be focused on the healing side. And I would also argue, certainly for this profession, that's where we want them as a society to be focused, right? Is we want them to be focused on helping people heal. And we don't want them to be focused on all the business stuff, right? We want to minimize that to the greatest degree possible. Of course, unless that's really where they also, everybody's different. Again, everybody has to find their own balance. Some people really enjoy that, I would imagine. I think the majority of people in the mental health profession would much prefer to just focus on the healing aspect. At least that's been my experience speaking with people. And so it's like, how do we start using these things to help communicate? How do we take this first step that we're in AI? How do we start building tools to leverage scaling out the authentic voice of the individual, right? Because I think that's really one of the powerful things that we have in front of us, is that as we learn to use these tools, and then as people, again, I think it'll be, I don't want to paint it as in the purely positive side, because I think it is going to be challenging for many people. But as people then as we better understand what we want to not automate, what we really want to focus on doing, right? And who we are, we can then automate all these other aspects of it, right? So for example, what we're doing is, how do we automate? How do we take an individual therapist, unique approach, their personality, what their focus area is, right? Or a clinic, and how do we help craft a large language model to then tell that story through content and material that can be then put out in front of the world, so that everybody, and then easily distribute it to any platform they want to, whether it's in the physical world, whether it's in the digital space. If we can take all those parts away, right, so that they can help authentically say, here's who I am, right? And here's, and easily get that out in front of people, that enables then a whole bunch of people to better actually direct other patients, clients to them, and further improve both the connection that they're finding with patients, right? But then also be able to improve their ability to just focus really on that healing aspect, right? And then maybe, there's a whole bunch of avenues of where that can go in the future, of providing tailored educational resources to clients as they continue sessions and all this other possibilities. But I think it really is like for me, practically, that all this question and then how it breaks down to even what I'm working on right now is really around that. It's like, what do we not want to automate away?
Mm-hmm.
And like first define that, and then sort of then aggressively start automating or providing the tools to automate that stuff away without
Mm-hmm.
becoming a tyranny where we're dictating to people, like you have to automate this away, get rid of it,
Mm-hmm.
Listen, here's a tool, you can use it if it fits you.
You cannot have the pasta dinner with your family, on a Sunday, if that's your tradition. It's like, no, sorry, we have faster things, and old things are. I'll pause. We're definitely going to leave wanting more on this podcast episode. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I know we have a hard stop in a couple minutes, so I'm glad you got to what you're working on. There's a lot more to say, and yeah, I mean, I've said this before in a different conversation. I'm not sure I believe it, but when I look at people who try to look out to the future, I do think about like Star Trek: The Next Generation and the Data character who's like, yeah, we automate everything. Let's say that's the optimum. And he still can't love, he still can't find love, and there's lots of questions and concerns about that. So love related things, I think I would put in that bucket. But that's like, I'm not saying I have one answer to it or that there is one answer to it. But it does feel like we're on this apex of this mountain where I remember in my lifetime, you couldn't go outside with your phone because the little curly wire wasn't long enough, like it could stretch to my sister's bedroom from the kitchen. That was as far as you went. So it was a very community phone. Yeah. And we would go outside. But then fast forward, I'm in London a couple years ago, and I'm staring at Monet's water lilies, and I'm like, this is transcendental to me. Like, I put my phone away and I just sat there, and I could have sat there all afternoon, except we had much more to do. So there is this beauty and art in life and the mountains outside that, it's nice to have pictures of, but it's sort of like the Kindle to me. It's like, oh, look how the Kindle is almost like real pages, it's like, and look, you can have 1,000 books in your pocket. I'm like, oh man, like, what's actually like real paper is real paper, it's like books, that's even more like paper than your screen. Not to say that there aren't advances in technology. Like when I get pessimistic, I go to the backup camera in the car. Like, you can't tell me that is not 100% net positive. There is nothing bad happening. I mean, I guess if you're trying to commit a crime in reverse, that would be super helpful. But that aside, there's nothing wrong with a backup camera. It's perfectly net positive. So I'm not a.
If we can just stop all those reverse going criminals out there. The community we got to check. Is there a community on Reddit for that?
It's harder, but it's so much more rewarding when you smash into the ATM in reverse. Like, sometimes the money just falls into your trunk. It's perfect. All right, we got to wrap. I don't know. It feels like this has just been, I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I know we probably didn't touch on anything we wanted to talk about, but I think we got into it. I think we really did. I'm happy with how this one's gone.
Indeed. I think we'll have to revisit it. I think I don't know. I think it is an interesting question that I feel is on the back of everybody's mind.
It keeps coming up in more and more episodes. Like last episode, we got into Web 3.0 and blockchain and AI. So I'm really fascinated to see. We might need to create another podcast, or at least have you back on would be a real delight to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Steve. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. You give me the desire again, every time you mention the outdoors and like even sitting in front of the painting, right? I totally know what you're talking about. It makes me want to go back and sit in front of the same painting and go outdoors. So I'm with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on, and hope you have a good week and all. And we'll sign off here. Thanks, Brad.
Amazing. Thanks, Steve.